Have you ever had the unsettling thought that the woman lying just inches away from you at night, the woman sharing your home, your routine, might already be living in a completely different future that doesn't include you? Imagine that for a moment. Imagine waking up every morning next to someone who is physically present, yet emotionally and mentally already halfway out the door. Most men think the most dangerous moment in a relationship is the day she finally leaves, but the truth is far colder than that. The most dangerous time isn't the exit itself, it's the quiet months leading up to it, when everything still looks normal on the surface. The dinners still happen, the house is still shared, the bills are still paid. She still smiles at the neighbors. Yet beneath that calm routine, a silent transformation is taking place. Behavioral patterns often show that when someone is preparing to leave a relationship, they don't just walk away suddenly. They prepare, they observe, they reposition themselves emotionally, socially, and sometimes financially long before the announcement ever comes. While you believe you're still building a life together, she may already be slowly building the next chapter of her life somewhere else. And here's where it becomes unsettling. The final phase before a departure often doesn't look like sadness or confusion. It looks like distance, irritation, and strange new independence. Small disagreements suddenly explode into major conflicts. Ordinary habits you've had for years suddenly become unbearable flaws. You might start to feel like you're no longer a partner, but a roommate who happens to pay half the bills. None of this feels dramatic enough to trigger alarm bells, but it slowly erodes the foundation of the relationship until you're standing on ground that no longer feels stable. I'm not here to impress a crowd or entertain people who just want noise in the background. I'm here for the man quietly rebuilding himself piece by piece. The man who went through something painful but refused to let that pain define the rest of his life. The man who learned hard lessons and chose growth instead of bitterness. If you're that man, don't stay invisible. Subscribe, leave a comment, let your presence be known. Not for hype or attention, but as a signal that you're choosing discipline, direction, and a mindset that refuses to stay weak after adversity. Because the men who transform their lives are the ones who stop pretending everything is fine when the evidence says otherwise. One pattern that often appears during the slow unraveling of a relationship is something that could be described as a quiet campaign of arguments. It's not the loud, dramatic fights you might expect. Instead, it's a steady collection of conflicts over things that previously meant nothing. The way you speak, the way you work, the way you relax after a long day. Behaviors that existed for years without issue suddenly become sources of intense frustration. Psychological patterns suggest that when someone is trying to justify leaving a relationship, they sometimes begin gathering emotional evidence to support their decision. Since the relationship once felt meaningful, walking away can create inner guilt, and guilt is uncomfortable, so the mind looks for ways to reduce it. One of the easiest ways to reduce guilt is to rewrite the story of the relationship so that the other person appears responsible for its collapse. This is where ordinary disagreements start turning into accusations. Providing for the household might suddenly be framed as emotional neglect. Asking simple questions about schedules might suddenly be labeled controlling. Your natural reactions to these accusations, confusion, frustration, and even anger, can then be used as confirmation that the relationship was unhealthy all along. Without realizing it, you may find yourself being pulled into a narrative that slowly paints you as the problem. Another shift that sometimes appears during this period is a growing fascination with independence in areas that were never previously a concern. Questions about savings, accounts, property titles, or financial arrangements might suddenly become frequent topics of discussion. Planning for the future is normal in any relationship, but when emotional investment in the relationship itself is declining while financial planning suddenly becomes extremely detailed, it can signal that someone is preparing for a future that may not include the current partnership. It's the practical side of separation quietly taking shape long before the emotional announcement ever happens. Many men in these situations respond the way good men often do. They try harder, they become more attentive, they attempt to fix whatever seems broken. They cook more, clean more, work longer hours, buy thoughtful gifts, plan romantic gestures, hoping that effort will reignite the warmth that once existed. but effort alone cannot revive a connection that someone else has already emotionally withdrawn from. There's a story that reflects this dynamic perfectly. A hard-working man spent years building a stable life with his partner. He worked demanding hours, provided security, and believed loyalty and dedication would naturally strengthen their bond. Over time, he noticed subtle changes. She seemed less interested in going out together, spent long evenings absorbed in her phone, and often said she was too stressed or tired whenever he tried to reconnect romantically. Wanting to help, he increased his efforts. He handled more responsibilities at home, tried to remove stress from her life, even made expensive purchases to make things easier for her. What he didn't realize was that while he was trying to repair the relationship, she had already emotionally stepped away from it. Her attention had shifted elsewhere long before he noticed the signs. By the time the truth surfaced, the separation wasn't sudden for her. It was simply the final step of a process that had been unfolding quietly for months. When he eventually walked into the empty quiet of his home one evening, the shock wasn't just about the departure itself. It was the realization that the relationship he believed he was saving had already been abandoned long before that day. Another noticeable change during this slow transition can appear in social behavior. Invitations to events may decrease. Shared photos might quietly disappear from public spaces. Conversations with certain friends, especially those who are openly cynical about relationships, may increase. Social environments can influence perspective, and sometimes people preparing to redefine their identity begin aligning themselves with circles that reinforce their new narrative. Gradually, the relationship becomes less visible in their social world even before it officially ends. Physical distance can also become a silent indicator. Human connection often expresses itself through warmth, touch, and comfort. When that warmth fades, it can feel like an invisible wall has been placed between two people. Affection may become rare, mechanical, or avoided altogether. Even small gestures, holding hands, sitting close, casual physical contact may disappear. While there can be many reasons for changes in intimacy, consistent emotional and physical withdrawal can indicate that the bond sustaining the relationship has weakened long before anyone openly acknowledges it. What many men discover too late is that separation is rarely a sudden emotional explosion. It's more often the final stage of a process that has been unfolding quietly behind the scenes. By the time the words "I'm not happy" are spoken, the person saying them may have already gone through months of internal decision-making and emotional detachment. For the man hearing those words, it can feel like the ground vanished overnight. For the person leaving, it may feel like a decision that has been building for a long time. This is why awareness matters. Not paranoia, not suspicion, but awareness. Recognizing patterns early allows a man to protect his peace, his energy, and the life he has worked hard to build. Because your time, your effort, your resources, and your emotional investment are all parts of your life force. They deserve to be directed toward a relationship where respect, loyalty, and commitment are mutual. When those elements disappear, ignoring the evidence rarely restores them. Strength isn't about reacting with anger or panic. Real strength is the ability to observe reality clearly, maintain self-respect, and make decisions that protect your future rather than waiting for someone else to define it for you. I don't create this kind of content for the average mindset. I'm speaking to the man who holds himself accountable even when nobody is watching. The man who can walk away from distractions not because someone controls him, but because he controls himself. Discipline is not something forced onto him. It's something he chooses every single day. If you came here looking for comfort or easy reassurance, this message probably won't sit well with you. But if you're the kind of man rebuilding his standards piece by piece, the kind who refuses to stay average while the world encourages mediocrity, then you're exactly where you belong. Most people watch a message like this, nod in agreement, feel a moment of clarity, and then disappear back into the same patterns that keep them stuck. But the rare man, the man who actually changes his life, uses information like this as a turning point. So if you know you're that man, don't stay invisible. Subscribe, leave a comment. Let it be a small act of commitment to the version of yourself you're building. Not for me, for you. Because growth begins the moment a man stops passively consuming knowledge and starts applying it with intention. One of the most unsettling dynamics that can unfold during the final phase of a failing relationship is the quiet transformation of the home itself. The place that once represented safety, partnership, and shared life can slowly turn into a psychological battlefield without the man even realizing it. Behavioral patterns suggest that when someone is preparing to exit a relationship while still living inside it, they sometimes begin provoking emotional reactions in subtle ways. Small disagreements are pushed further, tone becomes sharper, words are chosen more carefully to provoke frustration. The goal isn't resolution, it's reaction, because if an argument escalates and you respond emotionally, that moment can later be reframed as proof that you were unstable, aggressive, or impossible to live with. Suddenly, the narrative shifts. Instead of someone leaving a relationship out of personal choice, the story becomes about someone escaping a difficult partner. When a man remains unaware of this dynamic, he can walk straight into a trap built from his own frustration. Every raised voice becomes evidence. Every defensive response becomes confirmation of a story that may already be forming behind the scenes. The wise man understands something critical in moments like this. The more emotionally reactive you become, the more power you hand over to a narrative that may be forming against you. Calm observation and self-control become more valuable than winning any argument. Another pattern that often appears during this period could be described as emotional buffering. Instead of fully leaving the current relationship immediately, someone may quietly begin exploring other options while still maintaining the security of the existing partnership. The stability you provide, the home, the financial structure, the predictable routine can become a temporary safety net while another possibility is being tested. If the new situation fails, the current relationship remains available as a fallback. If the new situation succeeds, the exit becomes easier and less risky. From the outside, it may look like simple distance or distraction, but underneath, the relationship may have shifted from emotional commitment to logistical convenience. In this situation, the man is no longer being valued for who he is, but for the stability he provides. And that realization can be difficult to confront, because loyalty often assumes that effort will restore what has been lost. But effort cannot restore commitment that someone else has already redirected elsewhere. There is an example that illustrates a very different approach to recognizing these patterns. A man began noticing subtle changes in his relationship. Increased secrecy, sudden trips that seemed poorly explained, and small shifts in daily behavior that didn't align with the life they once shared. Instead of reacting emotionally or trying to win back attention through gifts or constant reassurance, he took a different path. He observed quietly. He paid attention to facts rather than excuses. He recognized that when transparency disappears from a relationship, something fundamental has changed. Rather than confronting every suspicion with anger, he focused on preparation and clarity. He organized his finances, documented important information, and sought advice from professionals who understood the legal realities of separation. He didn't announce his awareness or start dramatic conflicts. He simply ensured that if the relationship truly collapsed, he would not be caught unprepared. When the eventual confrontation came, he was calm, informed, and already several steps ahead in protecting his future. The lesson from that path is not about revenge or winning a battle, it's about understanding that a man's first responsibility is to maintain sovereignty over his own life. Once trust is broken, blindly continuing as if nothing changed can expose him to unnecessary damage. Another psychological shift that sometimes appears during this process is the gradual devaluation of the provider. The very qualities that once made a man respected, hard work, stability, loyalty, can suddenly be reframed in a negative light. Providing for the household may be dismissed as doing the bare minimum, Offering emotional support might be interpreted as controlling or suffocating. This mental inversion allows someone to emotionally detach while convincing themselves that leaving is justified. When virtues are repeatedly reinterpreted as flaws, the man on the receiving end can begin questioning his own value. The danger of this dynamic is not just the potential loss of the relationship, it's the slow erosion of a man's self-respect if he internalizes accusations that were created to support someone else's decision to leave. Family dynamics can also become complicated during this period. In situations involving children, subtle narratives sometimes begin forming long before any formal separation occurs. The tone of conversations changes. Small comments are made that frame one parent as distant, difficult, or unavailable. These impressions, repeated over time, can influence how children interpret the family situation. When a separation finally happens, those earlier impressions may shape how the story is understood by the people closest to it. Awareness of this possibility doesn't mean turning children into participants in adult conflict. It simply means recognizing that relationships inside a family system are sensitive and can be influenced by the emotional atmosphere surrounding them. One of the most powerful tools a man can develop during times of uncertainty is disciplined silence. Not silence out of fear or avoidance, but silence as a form of observation and self-control. People who intend to take advantage of a situation often rely on predictability. If they know exactly how you will react, they can plan around it. But when a man becomes calm, focused, and deliberate in his responses, that predictability disappears. Instead of reacting impulsively, he gathers information. Instead of revealing every thought, he studies the situation. This shift from emotional reaction to strategic awareness often disrupts dynamics that depend on provoking conflict. Ultimately, the most important realization is that every man has the power to define his own exit strategy if a relationship is truly collapsing. Waiting passively for someone else to decide the future rarely leads to peace or clarity. Taking responsibility for one's own direction, emotionally, financially, and mentally, creates stability even when circumstances are uncertain. If someone is already constructing a path away from the relationship, continuing to supply the energy that sustains that path only accelerates the process. Sometimes the strongest move is simply redirecting your effort toward building a life that protects your peace, your dignity, and your future. Consider this question carefully. If you lived in a house where you could hear termites slowly eating at the foundation every night, would you keep buying new furniture just to make the house look nicer? Or would you start protecting what truly matters before the structure collapses? The house represents the relationship. The termites represent the small signs that something fundamental has begun to decay. And the foundation represents trust. Decorating a structure whose foundation is disappearing will never make it stable again. So I'm curious about something. For the men who have experienced moments like this in their own lives, what was the smallest sign that first made you realize something had changed? Sometimes it's something subtle, a new level of secrecy with a phone, a sudden change in social circles, or a quiet emotional distance that words can't fully explain. Share your observation in the comments. Your experience might become the early warning sign that helps another man recognize a situation before it reaches the point of collapse. And if you've stayed here through this entire message, that says something important about you. You're willing to face uncomfortable truths instead of avoiding them. You're willing to learn, reflect, and apply lessons that many people would rather ignore. That mindset is rare. You're not just watching content, you're sharpening yourself in real time. If this message added even a small level of clarity to your thinking, subscribe and stay connected with this community. Leave a comment and let me know what part of the discussion resonated with you the most. Keep tightening your standards, keep strengthening your discipline, and keep building a life that stands on solid ground. I'll see you in the next one.